Testing. Ooh, that's loud. So it's pretty sensitive.
Yes.
Okay. So we're ready to go?
You are live on YouTube. So Felix emailed, he has an amendment he's wanting to keep the people before I emailed last night to Alex. Okay. So I just told him to email it to me and I can put it up on the screen whenever you guys are ready. Make it your name.
You mean Ashley?
Thanks, Mandy. Okay, I think we are ready to get started here. I now call to order this work session of the Anchorage Assembly on reapportionment. It is Friday, March 18, and we are noticed from 9:30 until 11:30 a.m. Welcome, everyone. We'll go ahead and start with introductions, and we'll go around the table.
Pete Peterson.
Meg Zalatel. Thank you. Crystal Kennedy.
Christopher Constant.
Suzanne LaFrance.
Dennis Wheeler with Resource Data.
Dean Gates, Assembly Council.
And we have members from the clerk's office.
Mandy Honest, Municipal Clerk's Office.
Desiree Camacho, Assembly Budget Analyst.
And then let's go ahead around the phone. Actually, Ms. Honest, would you be able to call the names of the members on the phone?
Miss Allard.
Here.
Mr. Dunbar.
Here.
Mr. Rivera.
Present.
Miss Quinn Davidson.
Here.
Mr. Weddleton.
Here.
And then I believe we also have Barbara Jones on the line.
Thank you, Ms. Honest. So at this point, I am going to hand the gavel to Mr. Constant, who, as you all know, is the chair of the Reapportionment Committee. Mr. Constant?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. The time today from 9:30 to 11:30, as Mr. Dunbar is fond of saying, and it remains true, that's a ceiling and not a goal. And in fact, I have to leave at about 10:50. So we're going to get started and hopefully get through the amendments for discussion and then be done early. So I'll get us started right now. Madam Clerk, do we have the printed items?
They're being brought down right now.
All right, thank you. So the purpose of today, as stated prior, is to review the amendments that were proposed by the deadline. And so there are two, and then there's a third, as we've just heard from Member Zalatel and Member Rivera. And I'm not sure what the body wants to do with those, but we'll figure that out. As we said before, any member can bring forward an item, but we had an agreement that we would meet the deadline. So we'll have that conversation when the item is before us. And so while we wait, I don't know exactly what we should do while we're getting the printed documents. Meg?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Chair. So this document coming from Mr. Rivera and I is truly an amendment to the amendment in true assembly fashion. So once we saw the amendments, we saw an issue, and I understand here, once you touch one thing, it all tends to cascade, but we truly tried to keep it very, very narrow as a responsive amendment to an amendment, just for a little context.
So anyone want to jump in while we wait for the printed items?
Can they tell us verbally what's going on? Or
Yeah, if you want to,
preface for it?
Meg or Felix.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. So yeah, like Ms. Zalatel stated, this is an amendment to the amendment truly. And as folks may remember, I advocated for us to have a path forward to deal with amendments to the amendment. And so hopefully this is something the body will be considerate of. So basically, our amendment to the amendment incorporates all of Mr. Constant's amendments except for two. Mr. Constant had two parts of his amendment which dealt with UMed and dealt with Airport Heights. We reversed those two amendments, and in order to do that, it makes a change in East Anchorage specific to the Turpin area, which Mr. Constant proposed putting all of the Turpin area into downtown. This amendment puts half of the Turpin area into downtown and half of it into East Anchorage, which it currently is in. So that's the scope, just three changes, two reverses. Really just reversing three parts of Mr. Constant's amendment.
Felix, one more time on those real quick.
Sure, so it's putting back UMed, which one part of Mr. Constant's amendment took a chunk of UMed, put it into East Anchorage, so putting that back into Midtown. Mr. Constant's amendment also proposed splitting Airport Heights. Part of it, I believe, is Midtown, part of it is to East Anchorage. We revert back to the original map, which put all of Airport Heights into downtown. And then reversing the change, part of the change to the Turpin area. So half of Turpin will go into East Anchorage, half of Turpin will go into downtown.
And if I might, so does that change the Turpin that, so all this balances the population, essentially the same, or what impact?
Yeah, essentially that's why we had to do that. That's why we had to do that, to keep the deviation. I believe the deviation on this particular map is something like 5.6 or something like that. I had to go back and look. But that's why we did that, just to make sure all of the population is balanced as much as possible.
So Suzanne, are you running the meeting?
Actually, Chris is.
Oh, Chris, okay. Can I follow up a bit, Chris?
Yeah, that's fine. And if y'all want to get in the queue, just text.
Okay, thanks. So, and not to really comment on your amendment, but just curious, because I had understood that, because I think when I made mine, I kind of had I tried to have Airport Heights all together, because I heard they should be together, but then we heard the more recent meeting, well, they don't really care. They're okay if they're split along this certain line, and I think Chris split them there, but I think, so your point is, no, that neighborhood needs to be held together, is that correct?
No, actually, my point is that neighborhood is okay being split, but there's specifics with their split. They want to be split in either downtown or Midtown. They do not want, no offense to East Anchorage, but they do not want to be split into East Anchorage.
So
either District 1, District 4, but not whatever district.
District 7.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
I find that argument to be very tenuous. I thought that the principle that was really at issue here was that Midtown wants to maintain the UMed section. Ms. Zolotel.
Yeah, so two things. Yes, the university and the hospitals, I believe, are a key piece to the infrastructure in UMed. And Mr. Rivera and I, we make concerted efforts as part of our Midtown representation around the university, especially trying to help bring them into the rest of the town sometimes, getting them out of their pocket there in Midtown. And we have established relationships with the providers, the medical provider Providence in that area. With regard to Airport Heights, there was lengthy discussion last night at Community Council, and the rationale for downtown or Midtown representation is, with regard to downtown, they feel an affinity towards downtown because they do share concerns about Merrill Field. They are right there, although 15th turns into DeBar along there. That is a major corridor into their neighborhood. And they spent a long time talking about some cohesive representation, particularly around the Seward to Glen PEL and the highway to highway projects. So that was one of their issues around downtown. With regard to Midtown, there was extensive discussion that when they leave their neighborhood, they come to Midtown. This is where they shop, where they go to school, where they live their lives. So I'm hoping I'm doing the robust conversation from last night justice, but those were the two rationales provided by the community council.
I got a note that Karen Presverdia joined us at 9:45. Other members wish to speak on that? We don't have it yet before us to view. So maybe what we'll do right now is move to the one that we do have before us. We have Miss Kennedy's. Actually, before we do that, Mr. Dunbar, you had mentioned you'd like to speak to something.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Constant. I just wanted to acknowledge, I think we all saw the news today that an Anchorage police officer was shot last night. I've communicated a little bit with some folks over there at Providence, and he's either currently in surgery or was recently in surgery. And so I just wanted all of us to acknowledge that he is expected to survive, but serious injury and a really serious event. And I know that everybody on the assembly, our thoughts and prayers are with him and his family. And hopefully he will make a full recovery.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Is that part of the incident that's ongoing in the Ingra area?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you.
So on that note, thoughtful to the people serving our city, Ms. Kennedy, we have your amendment.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I mean, in mine, there were several things that I thought we, as a body, needed to be responsive to in terms of some of the public testimony that we had heard. And so when I drafted my amendment, I did that obviously with the help of someone who's been very, just loves this stuff and has been really astute and adept at working with the tools to do this kind of drafting, and that is Bryce Wilbanks. So one of the things that we heard was that, we felt like we heard that the Airport Heights group wanted to stay together, the Rogers Park Community Council group wanted to stay together, and then certainly heard Mr. Rivera say that the UMed district needed to stay together. So that's a lot of what this amendment actually did, was to put that UMed district back together, and it does keep whole the other two community councils as well. And yes, you can say that, I guess in order to do that, you know how it is, you tweak someplace else. It did take a little more of the Turnagain area into District 1, other than just the land basically around West High. I just wanted to make sure that, right around the West High area, there's not people living there, obviously, but there are people right next to it. So we did end up taking part of that district into District 1. And then we tried to put a lot of the boundaries along the major thoroughfares where there are really wider divisions between neighborhoods, so that typically you're not really dividing a specific neighborhood, and then getting down into the Bayshore area. We really tried to stayed along the making the boundary around the major roads there, where there's just a wider division between neighborhoods, and then basically following the lines for the elementary school boundaries in that area. So I think one of the things that worked about this one was we kept the variation under that 5% magic number. uh, as difficult as that is. But anyway, so that was really the motivation behind this. And certainly for my district, we had a little bit of a conversation, about really what to do with Bartlett High School in that little area there, because a lot of people in Bartlett High School's membership population there actually live on Jay Bear, which is in District 2. But that's not something I, really want to fight or argue over. But I just thought I would point that out. But anyway, and so it is kind of interesting to hear a little bit more about Mr. Rivera and Ms. Zolotel's amendment. So when I get to actually see kind of where those lines go, I think there will be a lot of that lines up with what my amendment did as well. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Kennedy. Ms. Alto.
Thank you. I definitely agree. You need someone who understands this map software to make these amendments and work this process. My primary concern with this amendment is, Mr. Rivera and I won't speak for him, but we both expressed concerns about moving Rogers Park into the north or downtown district. But I think most concerning to me is loss of the Midtown business core out of Midtown. If that section, particularly around 36th, the Denali, where it is truly the commercial center of that area. And if that starts to leave the Midtown district, the other commercial area then in Midtown is all the way down at Diamond, which is really, to me, a really odd proposition. Because when people think of Midtown, it is that commercial corridor. And in fact, and I know community councils don't really play into this process directly, but there's the Midtown Community Council. And Mr. Rivera and I have been working with them specifically about a tax improvement district and exploring that. And I think it gets really confusing then if you pull that into the North District where there are similar downtown opportunities. So just an observation and something that's been on my mind.
So I would just clarify one thing. It's not just you and Mr. Rivera that have been working on that Midtown Business District. The entire body appropriated $100,000 for the effort to move forward. And so the entire assembly pretty much has already invested in the concept of the Midtown Improvement District, which incorporates those lands. Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And yes, while we do appreciate that the full body has appropriated that, it has been Ms. Alto and I that have been working on that. So I think during today's conversation, you're probably going to hear Ms. Alto and I speak up quite a bit. And that's because since day one, I have talked about how a lot of these maps have been disproportionately impacting Midtown. And to a degree, some lesser, some more major, the amendments continue that trend. So this particular amendment put forward by Ms. Kennedy, while it has nice lines and may be more aesthetically pleasing in that manner, I think it is somewhat counterintuitive in terms of what some of the neighbors are really interested in particular. Ms. Alice already mentioned Rogers Park and the desire both for Rogers Park to maintain together, but also to stay in Midtown. If there's a way for us to do that, I'm not sure why we wouldn't. And the amendment put forward by Ms. Alto and I, and frankly, the map that the original 11B2 does that. So I'm not sure why we would try to change that. And then two, going on to what Ms. Alto stated on the Midtown core, from my perspective, I don't think there's any choice but to take some of that Midtown core and put it into downtown, but the more that we can minimize that, the better. And so I appreciate some of the attempts in some of the other maps to minimize that impact to Midtown. But this seems a little bit extreme in terms of how it takes so much of that core outside of Midtown and puts it into downtown. So this map just has too many negative impacts on Midtown and rather this amendment. And so it's just not something that I can approve, nor can Ms. Zolotel. Thanks.
I have Mr. Welton in the queue.
Part of this, I think we get bogged down on these names because every time I hear Midtown District or District 4 being in that Loop Community Council, I'm going, what about us? Like, over there, that's unfortunate here because I not thought of it as Midtown, it's not as Abbott Loop. But yeah, it's, and I did, on map 11, try to keep Rogers Park in with District 4, and that's fine. But, we need to stop thinking that District 1 is downtown. Maybe start thinking of it as Northern Commercial District or something like that, because it really becomes that. I think under any of these maps, grabs a lot of, additional commercial land. But I don't, the notion that, this is Midtown, and District 4 has to be Midtown. District 4 is not Midtown. It's Midtown, it's Abbott Loop, thinking Taco Campbell. So quite a bit more than just that. So anyway,
Thank you. One thing I would say to your comment is that it's not a commercial district. The reason why it's moving across the north, those are residents and people. And so it is a northern district, but it's a northern district filled with people more than commercial property. Ms. LaFrance.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I had put myself in the queue to make a comment similar to Mr. Weddleton's, and I appreciate this process and this struggle to capture the elements of a particular district. And I would just echo the idea of, using the numbers because we are having to reconceptualize these areas. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mandy, did you by chance get the map from Rivera and Zolotel?
So this computer doesn't have the ability to open it. He said the contractors should have it though.
Yeah, they don't today. So it's not possible. Ashley is off today. So, and she was off last night.
Mr. Chair, could you repeat what Mandy said?
Yeah, sorry. Mandy said that the computer she's on doesn't have the tools to view the file. I assume it's a shape file. And so because of that, there's no way to review it at this time. So are there other comments on the Kennedy map before we move on to?
Is there only one
I just-
contractor in the office? Like there's no other person?
Yeah, right now there's not actually. Yeah, it just came in at whatever time last night. I tried to get a hold of them, phone call, they weren't available. Yeah, so, yeah.
Mr. Conklin?
Yeah, Ms. Quinn
Could you just
Davidson,
put me in the queue?
absolutely.
Go
For,
ahead now.
is it for the Kennedy map?
Yeah, I just wanted to make a quick comment.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you. This amendment does exactly the opposite of what my community asked, for West Anchorage and specifically that northern part, John, for District 3, and specifically that northern part. They asked us to select an amendment that moved the District 3 boundary over to Minnesota and includes Forest Park. So Ms. Kennedy's amendment actually not only doesn't do that, it makes the problem worse. So I will definitely not be supporting that amendment. Thank you.
Okay, and I have Mr. Weddleton in the queue as well.
Oh, thanks. I kind of going back when I was working on map 11, as I recall, I put that part of kind of turning in that has West High and Romick in there. And I think that was because I was trying to keep the Airport Heights together. And then, but now hearing or later hearing that wasn't such a big deal to them, that, so I think looking at, Chris's amendment, I think okay, to put that part of turning it back in, so that's all united. And then, and I think Chris has put Airport Heights. And so I know Chris did yours, but yours did it put something in District 5, and that's the issue with the amendment from Megan and Felix, is that right?
That's part of the issue that they've expressed.
Part of it, okay. So I wonder if, you know, we could see a fancy shape of it, you know, if you guys just took a pen and marked up the map and showed us what your amendment is to Megan and Felix. I don't know how you would show that to us. We're on the phone. But, you know, that would be fine. I don't need something fancy, just some black magic marker, you know. We get me 99% of the way there.
So, Mr. Presverdia.
Yeah, I believe that Ms. Quinn Davidson shared the comments that I had as well, is that the Kennedy map actually undoes what our community wanted, and so I'm happy to support that. Thank you.
So on the Kennedy map, anyone else want to comment before we pivot to the next? Hearing no comments, now we'll move to the.
Hey, Chris, can I just briefly?
Go ahead, John.
Sorry, thanks. So, you know, so looking at this from South Anchorage viewpoint, looking at the two, they're not hugely different. I mean, you know, District 6, in many regards, takes a big hit because Bayshore and Southport, a bunch of clap kind of goes away, and that's a lot of our, you know, current district. The one on with Ms. Kennedy's amendment, bringing it, bringing District 3 down into all the way over to Johns Road, that actually got a pretty quick response from Ocean View Community Council that they wanted all of that Johns Road into that District 6, and that's why on map 11, anyways, map 11 does that. And this one kind of backs up a bit, and that's kind of an issue there. I mean, that area would like to retain a District 6, so for me, it's kind of already given a lot by moving that, you know, that area to District 3. And this, you know, I appreciate that it follows elementary school boundaries, and there's some validity to that, but it just seems like to me it encroaches more into District 6. We've already changed quite a lot. Thanks.
All right, anyone else on this map? Okay, next we'll bring up constant amendment. So what my map does from the base map is it moves the section around West High into West Anchorage, the section around East High, including half of Airport Heights and down that natural boundary into East Anchorage. And then it did capture, just by virtue of where the lines are, the UMed district, which I think could be reversed without shifting any population in a subsequent conversation, which I'm reviewing right now how that would work based on the lines. And I think that there was a slight change down at the bottom of the map. Yeah, it took a very small section between Sea and Arctic and shifted it over to South Anchorage, just again to keep those deviations as small as possible. So with that, there was a little tiny weird change up by Bartlett, but it was not a track that has any people in it or anything. So it's, I think, just a factor of the different mapping tools and how they work. So, but the general principle, and then it moves the eastern edge of the district all the way up DeBar to Turpin Street, which is the middle school boundary for Clark Middle School. And so really the purpose was some final tuning to ensure that the high schools are representing the neighborhoods that they've traditionally been part of. And in order to fulfill the need to grow the district, District 1, the North District, has moved to the east. And so those are the fine details of the proposal. And again, I do believe that the university itself, the infrastructure, could be moved back into Midtown District without causing any shifting populations across the map, which I'm hopeful we can avoid through the amendment process. So that is my amendment as proposed. anyone care to add comments or thoughts, questions? Ms. Kennedy?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess just a real basic comment and in regard to Bartlett High School, I think I mentioned it already, is that there are just as many, well, I don't know the numbers, so I shouldn't say there are just as many, but obviously there are students at J-Bear who attend Bartlett High. So to a certain extent, there are definitely going to be two districts that share the population in Bartlett High School. And so just that comment there. But my only concern really on all of this, I mean, there are certainly other assembly members that have more skin in the game, if you will, on the boundary lines internally in the bowl area, but it's that 5.3% deviation. So do you know of any way that this can be tweaked? And maybe Mr. Rivera, Ms. Zolotel's amendment does, but I believe we have to be under that 5% or we've got some explaining to do.
So,
Thanks.
yeah, no, I believe that the numbers for the map presented by Mr. Rivera and Ms. Zalatel go the other way, but Mr. Gates, we had previously had a discussion about the 5% deviation and that my amendment has a 5.3% deviation. Would you add your thoughts to that? Is it okay?
So the 5% is a threshold for a deviation from single district. And I apologize if my memorandum wasn't absolutely clear about that part. The total deviation of 10% is where you have a presumption that it's going to be unconstitutional if it's above 10%. And in our Alaska case law, we look at a single district that goes over 5%, even if the total deviation is below 10. If a single district is over 5, that's sort of more suspect because you have one district going halfway towards that total deviation, even if the other districts' deviations keep it under 10. So it's a hard look, and you need to have a pretty good reason to do that for a single district. But sure, map the total deviation at 5.3. I mean, there's not going to be presumption of unconstitutionality. You still should have some rational explanation of why you're not being as nearly as practicable to the desired, I guess, fair representation and as near as practicable to, the ideal population splits. So it's not that you can't do it, but you should be able to explain well, and community council boundaries and neighborhoods, and those are all okay reasons as long as you're under the presumptive unconstitutionality. So 5.3 is okay. 5.6, I heard someone mention moving the line is probably okay. I can't absolutely guarantee that if it's challenged in court that it would survive. It all depends on the evaluation of the reasons why we're getting further and further away from being as near as practicable to the ideal populations.
Right. So, Ms. Kennedy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm looking for maybe some criteria by which you have to justify being over the 5%. So in other words, if the court required that we had to justify that higher variation, what kind of criteria do they look at that actually justifies going over 5%?
I would
can
like
it just
to
be
add one.
Yeah, can it just be something like we just couldn't find any other way?
Right. It's the answer that I have come to is that Eagle River is a distinct community, and even incorporating all of J-Bear does not bring it up to closer than 3% under the ideal. And because of that, we start at a 3% deficit across the whole municipality. And so that having taken and carved out 3,000 people from East Anchorage and sending them over to Eagle River Chugiak is more harmful to the people who aren't being represented by kind of their like community than is the deviation of 0.3%. And so that's the argument that I intend to make, why the deviation is okay at 3 above is because we have a built-in 3% deficit because we want to make sure that the community of interest, which is East Anchorage, stays integrated. And so we could shift back some of those people to Chugiak Eel River, but ultimately then we would be in a situation again where we have a population that it's just not fair for them to be represented in the way, because the arguments that have been made, we can't separate and it should be closer to home and more representative. So to me, that's the rationale that I intend to find, that the deviation of 0.3, but also ultimately we heard that the deviation numbers, it's 5% for any single district is really the standard. And so there's some room. Mr. Peterson and Mr. Weddleton.
But Mr. Chair, my question though, is there any actual criteria? And apparently there is not.
I'm not sure if I can list criteria when you're still under the presumptive level. So if a single district under 5 and the total deviation under 10, the criteria I think would be something that is rational. And all the reasons that you've been discussing to me sound rather rational, community council boundaries and neighborhood subdivisions, and that's all within that discretionary level. It's a political decision. It's a really political question. When you get above those thresholds, those legal thresholds is where it becomes a legal question. And, in the past, the court has upheld the 16% deviation because they had compelling reasons and justified. But here we're not at that point where we're above the presumptively constitutional thresholds. So it's going to be more political considerations. As long as you have those rational reasons, then you're probably okay. Clear as mud, maybe.
Thank you. And actually what I was kind of thinking in terms of how we have a variance for land use code, and there are specific criteria that basically allow us to approve a variance. And I was just kind of making that comparison to see if there was anything similar in reapportionment type or redistricting types of code. So
I
thanks.
would
don't think there is.
suggest that the benchmarks that we've been talking about the whole way, contiguous and the idea of communities of interest or areas of interest, those are the checklists that I've been using to benchmark my decision making. And so I don't think that this is in practice enough for a code to have been drafted that gives us some guidance on how to make those decisions. So instead, I think we should rely as best we can on the principles of the Constitution, the Charter, and the code. But ultimately, it's all of those factors that we've been discussing for all these months. And then more narrow, it's community interest, community councils, et cetera, until you hit what Mr. Gates was talking about, that legal threshold, which we're not near at this point. So I have Mr. Peterson, Mr. Welton, and then I have Mr. Rivera in the queue.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I was just going to say something similar to what you said, that my interpretation of what Mr. Gates said was that as long as we don't have individual districts over 5%, the deviation is good to go. And the highest deviation we have is just slightly over 3% for each individual district. So I think your map, hits the number that we need. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Weddleton.
Yeah, Chris, on your amendment, I'm looking at the line that is east of Burgaw, you move it over. Some goes to 5 and some stays at 4. And so what does that line follow?
Say that again.
Just south of, east of Burgaw and south of DeBar.
Yeah. Wait, do you mean west of
West of
Burgaw? Yeah. So
south
that
of DeBar.
there's a bluff there, and that's actually the census tract line. And so there's a natural break there, and that's where the feds have broken it, because there's a bluff that drops down, and it essentially from there, it's a very slow grade all the way up to the edge of town on the east of town, and except for the mountains of Russian Jack. So it goes up to Russian Jack and it kind of slightly comes down. And so that's the kind of end of that section. But there's a bluff that rises up that's really, I think, a glacial moraine. And that's on which Airport Heights is built, and includes the land of Merrill Field, which is at the same grade with a little drop down. There's a moraine there as well. And so it's just the natural geography and the federal census block.
Okay, yeah, okay. There's a good consensus, I guess.
Yeah, it's a particularly noticeable element if you go there, like the streets as you head east and west, 20th, for example, it dead ends at Sunrise and you have to go left and you have to drive around and then you can drop down towards, I think, Rosemary and all those streets down there. And so,
Maybe that's why I'm not familiar with the area. You can get there from here.
yeah, it's a pretty tight little community on the left. And then it's just, I mean, it's similar to the right or to the east, but it's, you know, it's geographically different.
Okay, so, and it, just in case we might be wrapping up, what I would ask is if Meg and Felix could just draw on a map, you know, and get that to Mandy, maybe, and have it draw of us. know
I
it's not
think
your
a map is
official
coming, John.
fancy version.
No, a map is coming.
Something that I can look at.
Yeah, a map is coming. Yeah, so there's a screenshot and they're printing it and it'll be emailed out or posted somewhere. So
Did Felix send it on to you? Okay, we're working on it.
working on it. So Mr. Vera, you have the floor.
Yeah, thank you. So a few things. First, going off of what Ms. Kennedy stated, you know, I have long argued that keeping in that 5% range, and many of us have, is okay. So in my perspective, the maps do that, 5.3%, 5.6%. I think they're all in a range that should be acceptable. Of course, it's going to be up to each individual member. And I have argued that, you know, this is one of those numbers that, for a variety of good reasons, it's okay to have it a little bit higher in these ranges. And then two, unless I'm missing something, Mr. Constant, I am seeing that on page 1 of your amendment, you do have the eastern boundary of the downtown of the North District moving all the way to Turpin, but I'm not seeing that being pictured in pages 2 through 6. So I'm not sure if there's a missing page to this amendment that didn't get included.
I actually think you're right. I think you're right. So, I mean, you could turn to, I think it's page 3, and it's not captured in the amendment, but if you were to just draw heading east onto Bar from Boniface and then up Turpin to the highway and then back up Boundary and the highway and then again down Boniface, that's the section that moves. I you know, I had all these pages and I didn't catch that missing. So thanks for the catch.
Okay, no problem. And then I think just to get to Mr. Wells's request, I think there are 2 ways that we can go through the amendment that Salatel and I have put forward. One is the screenshot, which I think will be helpful. And then 2 is, since it is an amendment to the amendment, we can, if it's a Turpin piece, well, we can go through the constant amendments and just tell you where we are changing things. So we can do it one of 2 ways or both ways, whichever is most helpful to the body. Thank you.
You know,
It's like a picture with word balloons.
so we have about 20 minutes for this conversation to go on. The chair can take back over, but I do have to leave at 11:50 or 10:50. So, Ms. Zalatel.
So I think we could start, as Mr. Rivera suggested, with the verbal explanation, you primarily working off of page 2, the first page of the constant amendment, and talking through it, and then it will be reinforced by the screenshot that's coming. Does that work for you, Mr. Rivera?
Absolutely.
Do you want to go ahead and do that?
Sure. So just to clarify, I have page 1 being the constant, the full map. Is that where I'm going off of?
Yes, that's what I was referencing. So page 2 then zooms in on that Airport Heights and University area.
I think I have a different pack than you do, maybe.
No, page 2 of the amendment,
Oh, I
not the
see.
map. So
Okay.
page 2,
I
it
got
says
it.
in the little
Okay.
bubble, 2 of 5.
Yep.
Okay. So for it is a little bit different from what I'm looking at. So that for me is 3 of 6, but that's okay. So So if we're looking at this amendment, that's specific for UMed and Airport Heights, is that what I'm looking at?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, you will see in the constant amendment that this puts, up to the bluff in Airport Heights, that part back into Midtown, and then the other part of Airport Heights is the East Anchorage, as well as putting the, East High and that part, DeBar, Bragad, Northern Lights, to Pine Street, putting that back into East Anchorage. You'll also see that the constant amendment puts UA Drive, Piper, Tudor, Wesleyan, puts all of that into, and Northern Lights, those boundaries, put that all into East Anchorage. What our map does, the Zolotel Rivera map, it essentially reverses most of these changes, except for the part that puts Bragad, Northern Lights, West Pine Street, and DeBar. That little section there puts that back into East Anchorage, with the idea of putting East High into East Anchorage. So you will see that in our map, UMed remains in Midtown, and Airport Heights, as drawn in the original map, will shift over to downtown. That is the change there. If there's any confusion, I'm happy to try and alleviate that.
So there are some clarifying questions. I have Austin in the queue for a broader point. Do you want to let the clarifying questions first, Austin, or are you ready to go?
I think I'm ready to go.
All right, go ahead.
Yeah.
You have the floor.
If that's okay.
Yep.
Yeah, and I'll be quick. I just, I wanted to comment that, the Chris's amendment, certainly Cameron and I heard a lot from West Anchorage about their priorities. And not only is the Forest Park issue a priority, but we also heard from Bernard that they prefer to be, in fewer districts. And I think there were some comments about Southport and Bayshore. And I guess my point is that, we heard all of those. I think I was thinking of bringing an amendment that would move Forest Park back in, maybe looking at Bernard. But ultimately, I think this is about compromise, and I guess not so much for delivers. Deliver means the same throughout all of this. But so I guess I just urge everyone, we're thinking about our own districts, but we're also thinking about how to not, negatively impact the other districts, or how we can all compromise. And I think in that vein, we set out this timeline that included having amendments due before. So I guess my question to Felix and Meg is, did you turn that, I guess maybe I missed this if there was discussion, did you turn that amendment in, or I guess you hadn't seen Chris's, so you had to turn it in late, but I guess I'm a little uncomfortable with this process, the fact that I can't see what you're talking about, and that it feels very last minute to me. So I guess right now, I would say I would probably not support it, but I literally haven't seen it. Along those lines, when you're talking about a screenshot and sort of, it sounds like you're running through something, there are several of us on the phone, and I don't know what it is you're referring to. So is there any way people can move us into that?
Yeah, and I think if you go into your email, there's been an email that I just received a few minutes ago, and it's there. And it is basically,
Yes,
not-
I just got it.
yeah, it's not up on the board, and now it's up on the
2
board.
minutes ago.
Go ahead, Ms. Alatel.
Okay.
Oh, wait, she's not, she's still got you still have the floor, Ms. Quinn Davidson?
No, it's okay. I think I made my point. It's just that it feels, it feels a little late. But okay, thank you.
All right, so Ms. Alatel.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Quinn Davidson. I appreciate that. I will say that I was surprised and I think Mr. Rivera were surprised to see the UMed area in the amendment, because it hadn't been something discussed previously. And that's why this was an amendment to the amendment. And of course, once you touch something, you start touching other things in this process, in terms of the map. So we do apologize for the lateness. We did work quickly. And you, of course, explore many iterations of how to make it work. So your point is taken, but we honestly did the best we could.
Yeah, just to respond quickly, I guess that makes sense because, none of us knew exactly what the amendments would look like. And so once we saw them, it's sort of either saying, oh, I can live with that, or there are things that I really need to change. So I understand that perspective, and thank you for setting this up.
I would offer, though, that my amendment first circulated, I believe, on the 7th or the 8th. Wasn't published formally to the viewer until much later, but they all went on, the 14th. But there were several viewings at published notice meetings where it was shown. So anyone else want to comment on, I guess we've pivoted to the amended map. Or the amendment to the amendment. So anyone else want to comment about that? Mr. Weddleton, you have it in your hands now.
Or was I in the queue for something?
No, but you said
Comment.
you weren't
Because I see it now.
until you had
Well,
it.
I guess I'm looking at it. It looks like it's a little hard to tell, but restores most of map 11. And so the real, gist of this is to take that piece of Turnigan that was in District 1 and to adjust for that moves the east boundary of District 1 a little further east. That's kind of the broad sweeping thing there, right?
Well, it does a number of things. It moves Airport Heights all into the North District. It takes back a portion of the section towards Turpin, and then it takes the property that's Providence and UAA APU, and so that's what it does.
Yeah, thanks.
Can you clarify the intention of the constant amendment with regard to the Turpin area? Because we have the map showing one thing and the amendment showing the other. Is it meant to put that back in east as the amendment reflects?
So yeah, the map is the amendment. The back pages are the detail. And so the detail is missing, but the main page does the action. Again, I don't know, that's the detail. If you go to the main map, which is the front page, that's the actual amendment, and it goes all the way to Turpin. And I'm just not sure how that secondary page was done like that. So it missed out.
Okay, then our amendment to the amendment would take a portion of that Turpin section and put it back in east.
Right.
Okay, I just want to make sure I'm tracking since we
Yeah.
have that just.
Yeah, that's
Discrepancy.
what has to happen there. If you compare visually the shape of this wild animal thing with the head and the legs over here, big tail now, basically it changes in that section that is the northern half of that block, or 2 blocks. Actually, it's the northern block above DeBar and Turpin. And then it shifts the Airport Heights section. Okay, that's 6th Avenue. Yeah, okay. So then it shifts the Airport Heights into the Northern District from East and Midtown. And that's the gist. Moves the UMed campus back. And I think that if the UMed is the big stickler without shifting all the populations, which creates a number of headaches, the infrastructure can move. That's not a problem, I don't think. And so because I had the IT team look upstairs or over to Elmore, that's actually a census block, and the current district follows that boundary. And so that section can move back in, but there is a lower population section, which is kind of that 40th Avenue off of Tudor, that's populous enough that it would cause some substantial shifting. And so I would argue we need to leave that in the East Anchorage district, but we'll have that conversation. So, but I think, achieve moving the infrastructure back in a pretty straightforward way because of the already currently existing lines. But the people, it's a different issue. And the people are concentrated into one tiny little section.
And that's why I would do it now.
Right. Yeah, there is one section where it is people, but yeah, mostly it's not. So I think that piece could be resolved. Who's that?
I'm sorry, I texted you.
I got it. Mr. Dunbar, go ahead.
Thank you, and I apologize, not near my computer right now, so I haven't seen the actual amendment. I was off for a little bit. I just plugged back in, but I guess 2 points. If I'm understanding what Mr. Rivera and Ms. Lozalto's amendment is, I guess two points of information. One, while it's true this part of this UMet area, and I have no particular feelings, it won't hurt my pride if the university and the hospital are in Midtown. I mean, I don't think that, I don't, doesn't bother me either way. I think we all try to represent the university, but I will say with the population in UACC, because the way UACC is split now, University Area Community Council, me and Pete already attend all of those meetings and have familiarity with that community council as well. So if some of that population needs to go to East Anchorage, it's not a population that me and Pete Peterson or whoever, are unfamiliar with trying to help represent. And I'll say with regard to Turpin, and again, I don't know exactly where they put the line or where you put the line, but I'll say that my annual tradition has just started in the last 2 days where I start getting texts, I've already gotten 2, from people who live in the Turpin area saying, I thought I was in your district, why am I in Igor Rachugiak? And the reason is because how it's currently laid out, there's no kind of logical line like Edwards or Turpin Street itself. It kind of curves around. And so I would advocate, I believe in your version, Chris, it's like a hard line at Turpin. It's very clear. And if the new proposal is somewhere in between Boniface and Turpin, I would just kind of perhaps advocate against that, because again, it's right now it's quite confusing for people in that area because it's like a squiggly line that doesn't have a clean break like Turpin. So again, and I apologize, I don't have the amendment in front of me, so perhaps I'm overreacting. That's not what it does, but just 2 points of information.
Yeah, then it's 6th Avenue, I was told, and looked at this street that is the divide between what goes and what stays, and it's north of 6th Avenue stays into east, and south of 6th Avenue moves into the north, and it is a squiggly line, but it is a defined line. It's not like that other section that was moved back in all the maps, which was that weird fish hook shape or that whatever you call it. So
I'll just say that sort of intuitively, I sort of prefer, well, never mind. All right, I'll wait to see it. Thank you.
Yep, thanks. And the defining boundary for me is that's the Central Middle School farthest, no, Clark Middle School farthest boundary east. That's their catchment district. Okay, Mr. Rivera, were you in the queue?
Yeah, thanks. So I think you did a little bit of what I was going to do, which I never got a chance to actually finish defining the boundaries. And I guess just to put it in the bigger perspective, if you look at all of the constant amendments, except for there's one page that's missing, at least the way that my packet looks, there are the main map on page 1 and then pages 2 through 6 define all of the other amendments. Missing is the Turpin amendment. But in essence, amendment 2, or at least pages 2, 4, and 5, and 6 are all part of this amendment. The only things that we mess with are pages 3, and then there's not a page 7, but it's page 7 where there you see that. Page 7 is Turpin, and like Mr. Constance described, that one just splits that one in half using 6th Avenue roughly as the dividing line there. So that northern part of, so 6th Avenue North is put back into East Anchorage, 6th Avenue South to DeBar is kept into the North District. And then I guess just to respond a little bit to Quinn Davidson's comments, one of the things that I had advocated strongly for was that when amendments came out, there might be parts of the amendments that we, particular districts, might feel uncomfortable with, but there might be sort of overall parts of it that we liked. And as you can see from the Zalto Rivera amendment to the amendment. We like most of the constant amendment. There are just two pieces of it, two parts of that amendment, which we do not. And so we feel like it is absolutely appropriate for us to be able to bring forward some changes. And I look forward to a robust discussion on those. I guess just one final comment. One of the things that I appreciate about the Rivera-Zolotel amendment to the amendment is that one of the benefits is that it keeps two majority-minority districts, which none of the other two amendments, as far as I understand, are able to do. Thank you.
I have myself in the queue, and then Ms. Kennedy. Actually, Dave's redistricting data is inaccurate, and my amendment does in fact maintain a second majority and minority district. So just know that Dave's redistricting data is not accurate. And so I had it run through both Ashley and some other folks who reviewed the statistics, who have the actual granular data, not the Dave's redistricting generalized data. But I want to say, pointing to the amendments that are like page 4 of 5 and page 3 of 5, it's an absurd thing to say that, oh, we're not touching those things, so it's fine because we're just touching two things. Those areas are just literally flaws between the Dave's redistricting tool and the actual maps. And so those aren't changes, but what the amended proposal does do is it actually changes everything but one of the changes of the map that I proposed. And so I don't think it's fair to characterize these changes as insubstantial or not even a majority. It's almost everything proposed. And that's okay. It's your right as a member to do that. But I would just like everyone to understand that from a practical perspective, it changes the Airport Heights shift that was made, that we looked around for the populations and tried to figure out, changes the UMed section, it changes the Turpin section. The only section it doesn't really change is the West High School and that little tiny change at the bottom. So it changes 3 out of 5 of the changes that I make. So I just want to make sure when I'm done.
Sure.
Thank you. I just want to be really clear that they're not insubstantial, that they do have ramifications for a number of other districts. And again, as a member has a right to make a proposed amendment, I won't be supporting this, though I will be working towards figuring out how to move that university medical complex back into Midtown, because I heard that loud and clear was a major concern. Mr. Rivera, no, Ms. Kennedy, and then Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I guess I'm just looking at this in terms of now we have just, we're getting more odd shaped districts, but it just looks like the chunk that goes off to the right, that what we were talking about before, that DeBar, Turpin, 6th Avenue chunk, and then the one that goes around Bragaw to Pine Street. Does anybody know, are those similar population districts that could be swapped just to clean that up? Or, and then we wouldn't be dividing that one section there in between 6th Avenue, having a District 1 and a District 5 section in there. But anyway, so I just wondered if anybody had the numbers on those two sections there and whether they were comparable.
I believe that they are comparable.
Okay, so if we were trying to not divide up have that weird line dividing that area using that 6th Avenue boundary, we could just switch that one section back around Pine to Bragaw, put that back in District 1, and then keep that whole section from DeBar to Boundary in District 5. But okay, thank you.
Mr. Rivera.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I guess two things. One is, I would appreciate any efforts to look at ways that we can alleviate the UMed issue. And then if there are any artful ways to alleviate the Airport Heights issue, would appreciate that. But I just want to be very clear on the record that I never insinuated that these would be simple changes. And I do think that some of the other amendments put forward by you in here are actually pretty substantial. I mean, I don't think putting Turnigan back in and West High back into West Anchorage is not an insubstantial amendment. So I appreciate your perspective, but you know, I think the Zolotel Rivera amendment, while it does have some impact on 3 of the districts, so it is substantial in that way, but I think it really responds to a lot of the constituent concerns we've heard. I'm more than willing to continue working to see if we can fine tune that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rare. I just wrote down a quote, simple change. So that's all I was doing, was reading back the note that I had written from the comments that I heard. So, Mr. Weddleton. Mr. Weddleton.
Sorry. It's on mute. You know, I think what we're looking at is there's like 100 ways we could draw these maps and it would all be pretty good. And, you know, with the base map, with the amendments, they're all pretty good. But so we are kind of in a nice spot where we're really doing some fine tuning. But I want to go back to Crystal's comment, and that, because that does jump out to me too, where we get some odd lines here. And so I think to Meg and Felix, if you could look at it and maybe consider what Crystal suggested, where you would put that section over there that's, well, I guess she described it pretty well, but so you just don't have that appendage odd thing splitting, you know, at 6th Avenue. It just looks odd. You get kind of where Forrest was saying, people will be confused on what district they're in, and just tighten up those lines somewhat. But that would make, it just looks weird now. It'd be nice to get it tighter lines on, a little more compact would be helpful for me on this amendment. Thanks.
Anyone else? Mr. Peterson?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So do we have any idea what the population numbers are in that area south of 6 between the bar there for the Zolotel and Rivera amendment?
Yeah, I believe it's about 3,000 in each.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Anyone else? This is a good natural time to break then. It is 10:50, just right on track. And we will have these items all before us at the special meeting on the 23rd, where we will take up the question of final reapportionment maps. With that, I will adjourn this work session.